The evening sky stretched endlessly above David and Emily, a canvas of twinkling stars casting their glow on the quiet meadow. They sat at a small table, surrounded by the soft hum of nature, far from the chaotic world. It was a rare moment of peace in their otherwise hectic lives. David, once a soldier who had seen too much violence, now found solace in these fleeting moments with Emily. She was his anchor, the person who made him feel human again. The candlelight flickered softly between them, casting gentle shadows across their faces. Emily, with her bright eyes and radiant smile, laughed at something David had said, her voice a melody that seemed to erase all the darkness that had followed him from his past. They had been together for a few years now, their relationship built on mutual respect, love, and a shared understanding of the world. David couldn't help but think about how lucky he was. After all, his life had been anything but normal. He had been a soldier, one of the best, but it wasn't the life he wanted anymore. His past, filled with combat and bloodshed, haunted him. He had left the military to find peace, to be with Emily, to live a life away from war. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they finished their meal, the world around them seemed to freeze in a strange stillness. The peaceful night sky, once so comforting, now felt too quiet. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A bright light cut through the sky like a slashing blade. The air vibrated with a strange hum that made David's instincts flare. He barely had time to process what was happening when the ground trembled beneath them. A fleet of alien ships, sleek and menacing, descended from the sky, blocking out the stars. Their shapes were unfamiliar, sharp, angular, and foreboding. They glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. The fleet was not just a few ships. It was a whole armada, each one larger than any craft David had ever seen. The moment the first ship touched down, a flash of intense light enveloped them. David barely had time to react as Emily was pulled into the air, her body rising from the ground, as if she was weightless. He reached out in a desperate attempt to grab her, but the force of the light was too strong, and within seconds, she was gone, disappeared. David's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the situation hit him like a sledgehammer. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what he had just seen. His mind raced. How could this be happening? Who were these beings? Why Emily? The sound of the alien ships powering up brought him back to the present. David snapped into action, running toward the nearest ship. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had once kept him alive in countless battles. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, it wasn't a mission, it was personal. He tried to make sense of the situation, to understand what he was up against. His eyes searched the sky, looking for any signs of the enemy, but all he could see was the chaotic descent of more alien ships. They were here. They had come for a reason. But what reason could they have for taking Emily? She was just a civilian, a human. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, cold voice coming from above. It wasn't human, but it was clear enough to understand. The voice, robotic and emotionless, declared, "The subject has been acquired. Prepare for transport." David's blood ran cold. Emily was already aboard one of the ships. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the nearest building, the one that housed his hidden stash of military equipment. He had once been part of a special unit, one of the government's best-kept secrets. He had trained with the most advanced technology, learned combat tactics that were designed to take down the most formidable foes. But he had left that life behind. Until now. As he reached the hidden compartment, David's fingers trembled as he unlocked the stash. Inside, he found the weapons and gear he hadn't touched in years. His tactical armor, energy blades, and his old combat suit. He grabbed everything with urgency, knowing that the clock was ticking. Emily needed him, and he wouldn't let her down. While he suited up, memories of his past flooded his mind. His training had been brutal, designed to break him and rebuild him into a weapon. He had fought in wars, faced enemies that were far more advanced than humans could imagine. But it wasn't just the combat that haunted him. It was the losses, the comrades he had lost along the way. People who had been there, fighting by his side, but were now nothing more than echoes in his mind. And now, Emily was at risk of becoming another lost soul. His anger burned hot, but there was something deeper, a sense of fear, a fear he hadn't felt in years. The stakes were personal. He wasn't just fighting for humanity now. He was fighting for the woman he loved, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. The rage inside him flared again, stronger than ever before. This time, he wasn't going to let anyone take anything from him. Not without a fight. He activated his communicator and dialed the number of his old commander, General Harlow. It had been years since they last spoke, but David knew Harlow would help. The general had always trusted him, always known that David could handle whatever came his way. The line crackled to life, and Harlow's voice came through, calm but urgent. "David, what's happening? Are you in danger?" "They've taken her, Harlow," David growled. "Emily's gone. I need a ship. I need to get to her now." There was a brief silence before Harlow responded. "Understood. I'll have a ship ready in 10 minutes. But you know what you're up against. These aren't just any aliens. They're the Zikar Dominion. Their ships are heavily armed, and they don't take prisoners." David's mind raced as he tightened the straps on his combat suit. The Zikar Dominion. The name alone sent a chill down his spine. He had heard rumors of them, alien invaders with technology far beyond anything Earth had seen. But David wasn't going to let fear stop him. Not now. "I don't care what they have," he muttered, his voice low and fierce. "They've made a mistake. I'm coming for her, and I'm coming for them." He hung up the communicator and turned toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. This was no longer about running missions or following orders. This was personal, and he was ready to do whatever it took to get Emily back. As David raced toward the ship, the world around him felt like it was moving in slow motion. The night, the stars, even the distant sound of sirens. It all felt so distant now. His focus was razor sharp, his mind locked on one single goal: to find Emily, to take down the alien forces, and to bring her home. But deep inside, David knew the road ahead was going to be long and dangerous. The Zikar Dominion was powerful, and they wouldn't give up easily. But David had something they didn't, a reason to fight that went beyond duty. And that was something no alien force, no matter how advanced, could ever understand. As the ship lifted off into the sky, David's resolve hardened. The hunt had begun, and nothing was going to stop him from saving the woman he loved. David sat in the cockpit of the covered human spaceship, the controls familiar under his hands, but the weight of the mission heavier than any battle he'd ever fought. His mind raced, calculating the course, the time, the odds. Emily was out there somewhere, abducted by a ruthless alien empire, the Zikar Dominion. The very name sent chills down his spine. But this wasn't about fear. This was about love, and the overwhelming need to protect the one person who meant everything to him. The ship hummed with quiet power, its advanced engines ready to tear through the atmosphere. David checked the tracking system once again, confirming the trajectory of the alien fleet. Using the best technology Earth had, enhanced satellite systems and deep space tracking sensors. He had pinpointed their location, but finding them was the easy part. Now, it was all about getting close enough to rescue Emily. The cold blue glow of the ship's holographic interface illuminated his face as he focused. The enemy fleet was on the move, slipping through space like ghosts, their ships cloaked and nearly invisible. But David knew the technology they were using. He had been a part of the best military unit humanity had ever seen. If anyone could track these ships, it was him. He tapped a series of keys on the control panel, activating the cloaking device on his ship. The ship's exterior shimmered, becoming nearly invisible to any scanners or sensors. It was the latest in stealth technology, designed to make the ship undetectable to the most advanced alien systems. David's heart pounded as the ship's lights flickered out, blending with the blackness of space. He could feel the tension building in the pit of his stomach. There was no room for error. David adjusted his course, the ship silently gliding through the vast emptiness of space. The stars were distant and cold, but to David, they felt like an endless void, just as his mind felt. Emily was out there, and every minute that passed felt like an eternity. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The way her laughter lit up the night, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about their future. All of it was at risk now. His fingers flew over the controls as he accessed the ship's weapons systems. The AI on board the ship, which was linked directly to his neural interface, offered suggestions for engagement, but David didn't need them. He had been trained for this, how to fight, how to win against the odds. But even with all his skills, he was just one man against an entire alien empire. The ship had been specially outfitted with combat-ready tech, plasma cannons, electromagnetic pulse grenades, and cloaking fields. But none of it mattered if he couldn't get close enough to strike. And he had no backup, no allies. He gritted his teeth, staring at the blinking red dot on the screen. The location of the Zikar fleet. He was racing against time. They could be on the move again any moment, and if they left the system, David might never get another chance. He couldn't afford to make a single mistake. As he continued tracking their movements, he couldn't help but think back to his days as a soldier. He'd been one of the best, trained in every form of combat, equipped with some of the most advanced technology Earth had. But that had been before he left the military, before Emily. Now he was a man alone. The training was still in him, but the weight of his past, the ghosts of every mission he'd ever been a part of, seemed to hang over him like a dark cloud. He had been part of missions where the odds were stacked against him, where every instinct screamed that the mission was impossible. Yet he had always come out on top. But this felt different. This was personal. It wasn't just a fight for survival or glory. It was a fight for Emily, the woman he loved. And that made all the difference. David's fingers tightened around the controls as the AI gave another report. Enemy ships entering the outer rim of the Zorath system. Estimated arrival time. 2 hours. 2 hours. He had no time to waste. He pushed the ship into higher gear, the engines roaring to life as the vessel shot forward. But even as the ship accelerated, David's mind raced faster. The Zikar ships were superior in every way. Their cloaking technology was far beyond anything humanity had, and their ships were built for domination. Yet David wasn't going to back down. He had one advantage. He knew their weaknesses. He'd studied them, watched intel reports, learned every detail he could about their tactics and technology. Despite the odds, he believed he could get in close. He knew how to use the cloaking device to his advantage, how to use the environment around him to stay undetected. But even with all that, David couldn't shake the feeling that this was a fight he was walking into alone. He thought about his old team. They were scattered now, but once they had been a unit, a brotherhood. But that life was behind him, and now he was standing alone, in a fight that would test every ounce of his resolve. The AI on board gave him another report, but he barely heard it. His thoughts kept drifting back to Emily, to the moment she had been taken, to the terror in her eyes as she was pulled into the alien ship. His fingers brushed over the holographic control panel, activating the stealth mode once again. The ship shimmered out of sight, becoming a mere shadow against the infinite dark of space. David was now invisible to any sensors, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy realized they were being followed. His heart raced as he checked the scanners. The Zikar ships were still nearby, but there was a feeling of dread in his gut. Something told him the worst was yet to come. He wasn't just hunting these aliens down. He was about to walk into a battle that no human had ever survived. The Zikar Dominion wasn't just a military force. They were a force of nature. David had been trained for this kind of fight, but it was different this time. He was no longer a soldier of a distant war. He was a man fighting for the love of his life. His instincts screamed that the time for stealth was running out. It was only a matter of time before the Zikar fleet would be ready to move again, and David had to be ready to strike. His hands gripped the controls tighter, his resolve hardening. He wasn't just David, the ex-soldier. He wasn't just the man who had walked away from battle. He was a man who would do anything, fight anyone, if it meant saving Emily. The AI on board the ship gave him the final warning as they closed in on the Zikar fleet. Warning: enemy ships are preparing for takeoff. Time to engage, now. David took a deep breath. The next move was his, and he wasn't backing down. David's heart pounded in his chest as he silently maneuvered his way through the darkened corridors of the Zikar mothership. The ship was a massive fortress, a leviathan of steel and alien tech that floated silently in the cold expanse of space. The interior was an alien labyrinth. Twisting halls lined with dark metal, flickering lights casting eerie shadows on walls adorned with strange symbols and glowing panels. The air smelled sterile, with a metallic tang that seemed to permeate everything. His eyes flicked between the dim passageways, the sound of his breathing the only noise, muffled by his cloaking suit. It was a high-tech suit, equipped to make him invisible to the ship's sensors and radar. But that didn't mean he was safe. This was a warship, and every inch of it was designed for defense. If he wasn't careful, he'd be caught the moment the cloak failed. The Zikar Dominion had outfitted their mothership with everything they could think of. Automated defense systems, robotic soldiers, and AI that seemed to watch every movement. But none of that mattered. He had come too far to turn back now. David's sharp eyes scanned the environment around him as he moved forward, the ship's metallic walls stretching into an almost oppressive silence. Every step he took, he knew, brought him closer to Emily, but also deeper into the heart of enemy territory. The tension in the air was suffocating, and every sound felt amplified in the dark, empty space. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Ahead, a faint hum echoed down the hallway. His pulse quickened. He crouched, pressing himself against the wall, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma rifle at his side. He had been trained to move like a ghost, and this mission was no different. The enemy soldiers were formidable, but David had something they didn't: experience and the drive to save the woman he loved. He heard the sound of mechanical whirring as a group of robotic soldiers appeared, their sleek, silver bodies gliding down the corridor. The robots were armed with energy shields, their design flawless, an impenetrable wall of defense. The soldiers moved in perfect unison, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of intrusion. Their shields hummed with power, capable of deflecting any projectile or energy blast. David held his breath, staying still in the shadows. The robots passed by, unaware of his presence. His heart raced, but he couldn't let the fear take control. He had prepared for moments like this. The cloaking device kept him hidden, but it wasn't infallible. One wrong move, and the entire ship would be alerted to his presence. As the robotic soldiers rounded a corner and disappeared from view, David exhaled slowly. He had to move quickly before the next group appeared. He crept forward, careful to stay out of sight, when his comm unit buzzed in his ear. "David, you're close," a voice crackled through. It was the AI on his ship, now acting as his guide through the mothership's systems. "I've detected a nearby terminal. You need to access it. It may provide you with intel on Emily's location." David didn't hesitate. The AI had been his lifeline since the start of this mission. As he moved, he passed several doors, all locked and secured. The ship's security was top-notch, but he had expected nothing less. He reached a small room with a terminal set against the wall, its glowing screen flickering with strange symbols. The computer had been designed to withstand hacks, but David had a solution. He slid a small device from his pocket, an interface adapter that he had stolen from the military's research department. With a few precise movements, he connected it to the terminal, bypassing the encryption protocols. The screen blinked, and then a message flashed before him. It was a recording, a message from Emily. David's breath caught in his throat. Her face appeared on the screen, her expression both determined and scared. "David," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I don't know how long I have, but I want you to know. I'm fighting back. They think I'm a prisoner, but I'm not. I won't go down without a fight." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. Emily wasn't helpless. She wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She was resisting. The fire in her eyes reminded him of everything he loved about her. She wasn't just the woman he had to rescue. She was a fighter in her own right. And now he knew that if he was going to get her out, they'd have to fight together. David clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. She was still alive. She hadn't given up, and neither would he. The terminal beeped, signaling the end of the message. But David wasn't finished yet. He dug deeper into the system, his fingers moving quickly over the interface, pulling up security logs and troop deployments. He needed to know where they were holding Emily. Time was running out. The AI's voice interrupted his focus. "David, you're not alone anymore. They've detected your presence. Multiple hostiles closing in." A cold shiver ran down David's spine as the distant sound of mechanical footsteps echoed in the hallway. He could feel the tension building. He was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. David ripped the interface device from the terminal and ducked into a small storage alcove just as the first wave of robotic soldiers appeared, their energy shields glowing brightly in the dim light. They were heavily armed, their movements precise and calculated. David's heart raced. He had no more time to waste. He activated the cloaking device again, becoming invisible just as the soldiers entered the room. His pulse thudded in his ears, but he remained as still as possible. The robots scanned the area, their metallic fingers brushing over the terminal, but they didn't detect him. The seconds felt like hours as the soldiers moved past, leaving the room without a hint of suspicion. David let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. But he couldn't relax. Not yet. He needed to find Emily, and fast. The ship's corridors were getting more dangerous by the minute, and the deeper he went, the more aggressive the Zikar soldiers became. He had no choice now but to go deeper into the mothership. He would have to face everything the Zikar Dominion could throw at him if he wanted to save Emily. His mind raced with thoughts of her courage, her strength, and it gave him the strength to continue. No matter what, he would get her back. The next room was just ahead, and David moved toward it with one purpose in mind. He was getting closer. And no matter how many obstacles stood in his way, he wouldn't stop until he held Emily in his arms again. David's heart pounded in his chest as he finally reached the holding area, a cold, sterile chamber deep inside the Zikar mothership. The walls were lined with thick, glass-like panels, each one displaying rows of high-tech equipment. Some of the panels contained unfamiliar alien machinery, while others held what seemed to be human prisoners, victims of the alien experiments. His stomach twisted at the sight, but he had no time to focus on anyone else. His mission was clear: Emily. He reached the final chamber, and there she was. Emily was chained to a metal table, but she wasn't the broken, helpless prisoner he had feared. No, she was holding her own, her eyes sharp and defiant. The glow of the room reflected off her face, but it didn't hide the tension in her posture or the strength in her expression. 3 alien guards stood around her, their energy weapons raised and aimed at her. But Emily, even in this desperate situation, wasn't backing down. She was using her mind, her eyes scanning the room quickly, her lips moving in rapid succession, issuing commands to the ship's AI system. David realized, with a surge of pride, that she was still fighting, still strategizing to survive. He could hear her voice over his comm device, a calm and calculated tone despite the perilous circumstances. "I've disabled their primary security grid, David. The blast doors will be open for only a few seconds, so be quick." David nodded, even though she couldn't see him. His heart swelled with pride and relief, but there was no time for emotions now. He had to get to her. The alien guards, distracted by the changes in the security system, were momentarily thrown off balance. David seized the opportunity, rushing into the room with the precision and speed of a super soldier. His reflexes kicked in as he moved, the years of training in the military surging through him. He was a weapon, and the only thing that mattered now was getting Emily to safety. With a swift movement, he disabled the first guard, a punch to its chest sending it crashing into the wall. The second guard barely had time to react before David disarmed it with a spinning kick, sending its weapon flying across the room. The third guard lunged at him, its jagged claws aiming for his neck. David's training took over as he ducked, his arm locking around the alien's midsection in a swift maneuver, flipping it onto its back. It wasn't a clean victory. He felt the sting of an energy blast graze his side as he incapacitated the last guard. The wound wasn't fatal, but it hurt. The adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him moving, though. He had to reach Emily. He couldn't afford to slow down now. The alien guards were down, but that was only the beginning. As soon as David deactivated the final security measure, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, signaling that the Zikar Dominion had detected an intruder. The ship's massive AI began sending orders to reinforce the hold. "David, we need to move now." Emily's voice echoed in his earpiece. There was no fear in it, only determination. She had always been strong, even in the darkest moments. The fact that she had survived here, alone, for this long was proof of her strength. David moved quickly, releasing her from her restraints. As soon as the chains fell away, Emily was up on her feet, her hands already reaching for a nearby console. Her movements were swift, precise, as though she had been planning this moment for days. The battle to escape was just beginning. "Follow my lead," Emily said, her voice steady. "I'll disable the ship's defense systems. You get us out of here." Without another word, they moved in sync. Emily tapped into the ship's AI, bypassing the alien codes with the knowledge she had gathered during her captivity. The ship's automated systems began to flicker and malfunction, the energy shields deactivating for just long enough to give them a fighting chance. But the Zikar weren't going down without a fight. The ship's defenses reactivated almost immediately, and a new wave of alien soldiers appeared, flooding the hallway. They were relentless, heavy, armored figures with energy guns and plasma rifles. There were too many of them for David to fight off alone, but he didn't hesitate. His resolve was clear. He was going to fight to protect Emily. The first shot rang out, hitting the wall next to David. He was already moving, diving behind cover as a barrage of plasma fire shot past him. His mind raced. There was no time for strategy. He had to act fast. He bolted toward the nearest alien soldier, sliding under a hail of fire, and using his super soldier strength to deliver a punch that sent the soldier sprawling. David's mind was a blur of motion and violence as he engaged in close-quarters combat with the alien forces. His punches landed with devastating force, sending soldiers flying across the room. He was faster, stronger, and more skilled than any of them, but the numbers were against him. Emily was a constant presence in his mind, and that kept him moving. His movements were fluid, each one executed with military precision, but his thoughts were consumed with her survival, her strength, and their need to escape together. Every alien soldier he took down brought him closer to his goal. As he dispatched one more alien soldier, his mind flashed to the memories of his old squadron. The men he had once fought beside, the ones he had lost in the horrors of battle. That loss, those faces, those names, it all fueled his anger. The Zikar had taken everything from him. They had taken his brothers, and now they had taken Emily. He would make them pay for every life they had ruined, and he would never stop fighting until every last one of them had fallen. But there was no time for vengeance. Not yet. "David." Emily's voice crackled over the comms. "I've got the way out. There's a shuttle bay on the lower level. I can override the lock." David looked toward her, seeing the fire in her eyes. She was still standing, still fighting. His heart swelled with pride. They were going to make it out of here, together. He nodded, his jaw set in determination. They fought side by side, their movements perfectly in sync. As the last alien guard fell, they ran toward the exit, their path clear but still fraught with danger. The ship's AI was fighting against them, sending more and more forces their way, but David and Emily didn't hesitate. They knew that their survival depended on each other. In the distance, the shuttle bay doors loomed, an escape from the chaos. But as they ran toward it, an explosion rocked the ship. The blast threw them both to the ground, but they didn't stop. They were too close now. They couldn't give up. The shuttle bay doors opened, and David felt the cool rush of air as they made their way inside. He was exhausted, wounded, but his heart was full of a single purpose: get Emily out, no matter the cost. They reached the shuttle. Emily quickly initiated the launch sequence, and as the countdown began, they both took one last look at the chaos surrounding them. The ship was on the verge of self-destruction, but they were safe. The shuttle engines roared to life, and they shot into space, away from the hell that had almost claimed them both. David couldn't help but glance at Emily, her face bruised but filled with triumph. She had survived. They had survived. They were free. The shuttle shot through the cold void of space, the Z-Car mothership falling behind them like a burning carcass. The blast that had nearly destroyed it had sent shockwaves through the ship, but they had escaped. The immediate danger had passed. David leaned back in his seat, his hand resting on Emily's as she navigated the shuttle with practiced precision. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace. Emily looked over at David, her face bruised but alive. "We made it," she said, her voice soft but filled with relief. David's lips curled into a tired smile. "We made it." But before they could even fully process their escape, the shuttle's hull trembled with an overwhelming force. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard, signaling an incoming attack. David's instincts kicked in instantly, his hand gripping the console. What the hell? His eyes scanned the readings. A new ship, larger, more imposing than anything they had seen before, had locked onto their position. Before he could say anything more, the voice of the Z-Car warlord echoed over the comms, deep and terrifying. "You think you can escape, human. You've underestimated me." David's blood ran cold. He had been so sure that the threat was over. They had gotten away, but now the true terror was just beginning. The screen flickered to life, and there, standing in the middle of the comms feed, was the Z-Car warlord. His towering figure filled the screen. His dark, obsidian armor glinted menacingly in the dim light of space. The warlord was a giant, a beast of muscle and technology, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce right through David. "You know who I am," the warlord said, his voice calm, but filled with deadly intent. "I knew exactly who you were the moment you stepped foot on my ship. You're not just some human. No, you are a super soldier, and I've been waiting for this moment." David's heart sank. He had thought he was hidden, that his past had been left behind. But the warlord had known all along. The things David had done, the lives he had taken, were still part of him. And now, the warlord would make him pay. Before David could react, the warlord's ship lurched forward, sending shockwaves through the shuttle. "Prepare to die, human. You will fight me, one-on-one. If you want to survive, you'll have to earn it." The warlord's massive warship pulled them in, forcing David and Emily into a deadly trap. The shuttle systems went dark, and before David could take any action, the doors to their craft were violently torn open. They were sucked out into the massive hangar of the Z-Car flagship, and before they could even fully orient themselves, they were surrounded by a circle of Z-Car warriors. David didn't have time to think. His muscles tensed, ready to fight. But then, the warlord appeared before him, his towering figure casting a long shadow over David's body. "You will fight me now," the warlord declared. His voice was like a death sentence. David's heart was racing. He could see the fear in Emily's eyes, but she didn't speak. She knew this was a fight he had to face alone. The moment of truth had arrived. The warlord's weapon, a massive energy sword, crackled to life in his hands, the hum of power filling the air. He swung it with terrifying speed, creating a bright trail of light as it cut through the air toward David. David barely managed to dodge, his body moving on pure instinct. His military training kicked in, but this wasn't just any battle. This was a fight for survival. The warlord grinned, showing teeth that looked more like sharp blades than anything human. "You think you can win against me, little soldier?" He swung the sword again, and David barely managed to duck. The air sizzled where the blade had passed, and David could feel the heat. He was outclassed in sheer strength, but he had something the warlord didn't, a lifetime of combat experience, and a will to protect Emily that burned hotter than any weapon. David lunged forward, his fist landing squarely against the warlord's armored chest. The blow had little effect, but it bought David enough time to backpedal and reassess. The warlord wasn't just physically imposing. He was quick and deadly, using his size and strength to his advantage. But David's smaller frame and agility gave him a slight edge. They clashed again, the air thick with tension. The sound of their weapons clashing echoed through the hangar, and sparks flew as David dodged another slash from the warlord's massive sword. The fight was brutal. Each blow was heavier than the last, each move more desperate. David's muscles burned from the exertion, and his wounds from earlier in the battle were beginning to slow him down. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. In the midst of the chaos, a familiar voice crackled over David's comm device. "David, I'm here." It was Commander Harlow, David's old friend from his squadron. He had arrived just in time. David's heart surged with hope, but before he could even acknowledge the voice, Harlow's ship appeared on the periphery, launching a barrage of energy blasts at the warlord's forces. For a brief moment, David thought they might have a chance to escape, but the warlord's eyes flicked to the sky. A twisted grin spread across his face. "You think you can save him? Think again," the warlord roared. Without warning, he reached out and sent a powerful wave of energy toward Harlow's ship, causing it to explode in a shower of flames and debris. The blast sent a shockwave through the hangar, knocking David off his feet. He looked up in disbelief, his heart shattering at the sight of the ship falling into the void of space. "No," David screamed, his voice raw with grief and rage. His old friend, his brother in arms, was gone. The loss fueled something dark inside him. Anger, grief, and the thirst for vengeance consumed him. He had lost so much in his life, but this felt different. The warlord had taken everything from him, and now he was going to pay. David pushed himself back onto his feet, his body aching, but his will stronger than ever. He locked eyes with the warlord, whose grin had faded into a snarl of contempt. "I will make you pay for that," David growled. His voice was low, dangerous. The warlord sneered. "You think you can defeat me?" David didn't answer. Instead, he charged, his fists flying. The fight that followed was chaos, a whirlwind of energy blasts, hand-to-hand combat, and explosive impacts. David's super soldier instincts took over completely, his every movement calculated, his every strike precise. He didn't hold back. The warlord's strength was overwhelming, but David's heart was even stronger. His mind burned with memories of his fallen comrades, of all the lives he had lost. And now he fought not just for himself, but for them, for Harlow, for the men he had lost in battle, and for Emily, the woman he loved. The final strike came when David, using all his remaining strength, disarmed the warlord with a swift move. The warlord staggered back, his weapon flying from his hand, and in that moment, David took his chance. With one final bone-shattering punch, David sent the warlord crashing to the ground, his massive form hitting the floor with a resounding thud. David stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds, but his eyes were clear. The battle was over. The warlord was dead. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. David had avenged his fallen comrades, but at what cost? His mind was numb, his body broken, but he had won. Emily was safe. That was all that mattered now. But as he looked at her, her eyes filled with tears, he realized something more important. The battle may have ended, but the war was far from over. The universe had many enemies, but with Emily by his side, he knew he could face anything. The moment of victory had come, but David didn't have time to savor it. The warlord lay defeated on the cold steel floor of the Zikar mothership, his massive form crumpled and still. David stood over him, chest heaving with exhaustion and rage, the heat of battle still lingering in his veins. The warlord had been a symbol of the alien threat, a towering giant whose death signified humanity's resilience. But that wasn't enough. The battle, the war, was far from over. A loud bone-rattling alarm cut through the silence. It was the sound of the ship's emergency systems kicking in. David's eyes snapped to the nearby control panels. A flashing red light warned of an impending catastrophe. The Zikar ship was on a crash course with a nearby planet. David. Emily's voice broke through the chaos. She had already moved to a console, her fingers flying over the controls. We need to get out of here now. The ship's going down. David's heart raced. The ship had been severely damaged during their escape, the explosions and battle taking their toll. But the Zikar had set their final trap, a collision course that would destroy the mothership and anyone still aboard. Emily was right. There was no time to waste. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke, and the steady hum of the ship's systems was growing weaker. As they both made their way to the shuttle, David could hear the screeching of metal and the groan of the failing structure. The ship was falling apart. "Do you have the coordinates?" David asked as he reached Emily. The shuttle they had arrived in was their only chance at survival. A small escape pod barely able to withstand the damage. But it was their only hope. "Got them," Emily replied, her voice steady but urgent. She slapped a few buttons on the control panel, activating the shuttle's engines. "Hang on." David didn't need to be told twice. He strapped himself in next to her, his eyes scanning the chaotic mess of sparks and fire around them. The ship was coming apart. Time was slipping away. As the shuttle blasted out of the wrecked hangar bay, the massive Zikar mothership loomed behind them, its hull cracking and groaning under the pressure of the imminent crash. It was as if the very heart of the ship had been ripped out. The engine sputtered, struggling to maintain control, but it was clear that nothing could save it now. "Hold on," Emily shouted as the shuttle shot forward, narrowly avoiding the collapsing walls of the hangar. Outside the viewport, the planet below was growing larger by the second. The shuttle lurched forward, its engines roaring as Emily pushed it to its limits, weaving through falling debris and escaping the wreckage of the Zikar mothership. The battle might have been over, but the escape was just beginning. David looked out at the planet growing ever closer, knowing that their mission wasn't finished yet. Their fight had been won against impossible odds, but the victory was theirs. They had beaten the warlord, but their struggle for survival wasn't over. They pushed forward, the shuttle now racing toward a nearby space station, a place of refuge. But the Zikar ship wasn't done with them. As they made their way to the edge of the atmosphere, the ship behind them began to collapse inward, the massive structure losing the battle against the inevitable. The engines failed, and the core of the mothership detonated, sending a shockwave that rattled the shuttle and caused the controls to flicker wildly. David gritted his teeth, holding onto his seat as the shuttle was rocked by the explosion. They had been too close to losing everything. But they had made it. The shuttle cleared the debris, and ahead of them, the space station loomed large. Emily didn't waste a second. She adjusted the shuttle's trajectory, and steered them toward safety. With one last burst of speed, the shuttle broke free from the chaos of the explosion, leaving the dying Zikar mothership to its fiery end. The space station's docking bay doors opened wide, and they slid in, the shuttle landing with a jarring thud. They were safe, for now. David exhaled a deep breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The adrenaline that had kept him going through the battle and escape slowly began to fade. His muscles ached, his body battered and bruised from the brutal fight with the warlord. But the worst was over. Emily sat back in her seat, her face streaked with grime and sweat, but a look of relief slowly spread across her face. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned to look at her, his heart swelling with emotions. He had come so far through so much, and now they were safe. But more than that, they had accomplished something incredible. They had survived. Together. "Yes, we did," David replied, his voice hoarse. He glanced out the window, looking at the distant stars. "But it's not over. It can never be over." Emily looked up at him, her expression softening. She knew what he meant. The galaxy wasn't done with them, and the alien forces they had fought were only the beginning. David had seen too much destruction to believe the fight was over. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something other than anger or hatred. There was hope. "David," Emily said, her voice breaking the silence. "What happens now?" David smiled. "We protect Earth. We keep fighting. There's a lot more out there, but I won't do it alone this time. We do it together." He looked down at her hand, which rested on the console between them. He reached out and took it in his own, the simple gesture feeling like more than just a connection. It was a promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. David had been a soldier once, a lone warrior who thought he didn't need anyone. But now he understood the value of teamwork, of having someone to fight for. Emily had reminded him of that. They had come so far, surviving battles that seemed impossible. They had fought together, and in the end, it was their unity that had led them to victory. The battle with the Zikar warlord had been brutal, but the real victory was the strength they found in each other. David looked out of the shovel window once again, his eyes scanning the dark expanse of space. Earth was visible in the distance, a pale blue dot in the vastness of space. It was home. It was all they had left. But that was enough. "We'll be ready," David said softly, his voice full of resolve. Emily nodded, squeezing his hand. "We'll be ready." The shuttle engines hummed to life as they prepared to leave the space station, and as they broke free into the vastness of space, they knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they would face it as a team. David glanced at Emily, and they shared a look, a wordless understanding between them. They had survived against impossible odds, and now they had each other. And that was more than enough.